The galaxy was silent. Stars shimmered in their usual patterns, and planets rotated through the vast reaches of space, following their ancient courses. But within the heart of the universe, something was stirring, a disturbance so small, no one had noticed it yet. At a small human outpost on the edge of the galaxy, Commander Leah Evans sat in her chair, staring at the control screens in front of her. The quiet buzz of machinery surrounded her, but her mind was elsewhere. The mission was routine. Keep watch, monitor communications, ensure the safety of the station. Yet, something felt off. Leah was the first to notice the anomaly, a faint pulse in the radio frequencies. At first it was so weak that even the sensors could hardly detect it. But as the seconds passed, the pulse grew louder, more distinct, almost as if it was calling out to them. Leah frowned and tapped a few keys on her console, pulling up a detailed scan of the signal. "This doesn't make sense," she muttered under her breath. The signal had a strange structure, unlike anything they had encountered before. It wasn't random static, nor was it a natural interference. This was something deliberate, and it was directed at them, directed at Earth. For a moment, Leah's mind raced. It had to be a mistake, a malfunction in the equipment. But her instincts told her otherwise. She quickly pinged the rest of the team, waiting for their responses. She couldn't risk letting this slip by without further investigation. "Commander," a voice crackled through her earpiece, "we've confirmed the anomaly. It's not from any known source. This signal, it's definitely artificial." Leah's heart skipped a beat. "Do we know where it's coming from?" "No, Commander. It's too far off. But it's not close to any of the usual communication relays. It's different." Leah stood up, her boots clicking against the metal floor. Her fingers hovered over the controls. The pulse was growing stronger now, each wave more distinct than the last. Whatever this was, it wasn't meant to be ignored. "Keep monitoring it." "I'll notify higher command," Leah said. She turned quickly, her mind already shifting to the next step. They needed answers. Now. She couldn't shake the feeling that this was the beginning of something far bigger than a strange signal. The universe had been quiet for so long, but as her team continued to monitor the signal's progress, it was clear this wasn't just a random anomaly. Something was coming, something that had been hidden, waiting, perhaps for centuries. Back on Earth, a meeting was taking place. News of the mysterious signal had quickly made its way to the highest levels of command. The leaders of humanity, once skeptical of the idea of life beyond their planet, now had to face a reality they had never prepared for, the possibility that they were not alone. And if they were not alone, what would this mean for humanity? In a darkened conference room in Earth's capital, Admiral Ryan Hayes, a man hardened by years of military command, leaned forward in his seat. He was flanked by several top military officers, all watching a holographic display of the signal. "Is this a joke?" Admiral Hayes asked, his voice thick with skepticism. "I wish it were," replied Dr. Natalie Hahn, a leading scientist in extraterrestrial communications. "This signal is real. It's not some kind of fluke, and it's definitely not from any of the known species we've come in contact with before." Another officer, Colonel James Reed, shook his head. "What are we supposed to do with this? If it's an alien species trying to communicate, how are we supposed to respond? We're not prepared for this." Hayes stood up, his mind already working through the possibilities. The thought of an alien species sending a message to Earth stirred both excitement and fear in his chest. He could feel the weight of the moment. If this was an invitation, or a challenge, they couldn't afford to be caught off guard. "We don't know their intentions," Hayes said, pacing slowly across the room. "But we will respond. We have to. No matter what. Humanity is not going to be caught unprepared." The room fell silent. Every officer in the room knew that this was not just a matter of curiosity. If this was an alien signal, it could mean war, peace, or something entirely new. No one could predict what would happen next, but they all understood the stakes. Whatever came next, Humanity would need to be ready. Back at the outpost, Leah continued to watch the signal pulse on her screen. The anomaly was growing stronger, clearer by the minute, and as the signal's frequency shifted, a chill ran down her spine. It wasn't just a message, it was a challenge. The aliens on the other side had no idea what they were about to awaken, and Leah couldn't shake the feeling that the universe, as calm as it had been for millennia, was about to explode into chaos. The tipping point had been reached, and humanity was finally going to show its true power. It was time to respond, time for the real war to begin. The first response from Earth was not a grand show of force. No, it was much more subtle, and it came in the form of a simple message, a message that was sent out across the stars. It was a peaceful offering, one that showcased humanity's desire to understand and communicate rather than conquer or fight. But underneath the calm exterior, there was a deep primal need to be ready for whatever would come next. Commander Leah Evans sat in the command center, her eyes fixed on the now powerful signal that was still pulsing on her monitor. The signal was no longer just a faint anomaly. It had grown stronger, clearer, and more distinct. It had been a few hours since they first detected it. And now, the entire crew was on high alert. Something had shifted, and they were no longer dealing with a mystery. They were dealing with a warning. "Commander," one of the technicians called out from across the room, "we've finished decoding the message. It's ready to transmit." Leah stood from her chair, her heart racing. This was it, the moment when humanity would finally reach out beyond the confines of its own solar system. The message would be the first direct contact, the first real attempt to communicate with whatever was out there. The thought of it, of this monumental step for humanity, was both thrilling and terrifying. She walked to the console, her fingers hovering above the keys. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her, as if the fate of humanity itself was tied to the simple action of pressing a button. The message they had crafted was simple, an introduction of who they were, a peaceful offer to learn and share knowledge, and most importantly, an invitation to communicate. The message included coordinates, a request for a response, and an expression of curiosity about their newfound neighbors in the galaxy. "We are humans. We come in peace. We offer knowledge, understanding, and friendship. Tell us who you are." Leah glanced over at her crew, each of them staring at her, waiting. The room was tense. No one spoke, but everyone knew the importance of the message. They were reaching out to the unknown, and whatever response came back, whether peaceful or hostile, would shape the future of humanity. "Transmit the message," Leah ordered. The technician nodded, and with a few swift movements, the message was sent out, traveling through the vastness of space at the speed of light. Now, they waited. Light years away, aboard an alien vessel cloaked in darkness, a different type of waiting was taking place. The creatures on board were not like humans at all. Their skin was a deep shade of purple, their eyes large and black, reflecting the cold, distant stars outside. They were known as the Uinar, a species feared across the galaxy for their ruthlessness and advanced technology. Their reputation had spread far and wide, and most civilizations either bent to their will or were eradicated in a matter of days. The Uinar had been watching Earth for centuries, silently observing from the shadows, studying the humans. They had long since concluded that Earth posed no immediate threat. The humans were still young, their technologies primitive compared to the vast empires that ruled the galaxy. But that had not stopped the Uinar from watching. They were not interested in Earth's resources or its people, at least not yet. They were waiting for something else. And now, the signal from Earth had caught their attention. Commander Rakash, leader of the Uinar expedition, stared at the communication screen, her sharp black eyes narrowing as she read the message that had been sent by the humans. It was a strange one. Simple, almost innocent. A peaceful greeting, an offer of understanding. Rakash felt something stir within her, a mixture of curiosity and caution. The Uinar did not communicate like this. They did not seek peace. They took what they wanted by force. She glanced at her officers, each of them watching her, waiting for her orders. "Prepare the fleet," she said, her voice cold and authoritative. "The humans have sent a message, but they will soon learn that we do not respond to weakness." Her words echoed through the room, and the officers immediately sprang into action. Rakash's plan was already taking shape in her mind. She would test the humans, see how far they were willing to go for peace. If they proved weak, if they were unprepared for what was coming, then the Ymnar would crush them without hesitation. But if they were stronger than she expected, well, that was something worth exploring. Back on Earth, the response was slow, but not unexpected. A few days passed without any word from the aliens, and Leah's crew began to feel the tension grow. Their message had been sent, and now they waited. The minutes felt like hours, the hours felt like days. They were caught in a strange limbo, not knowing if they had made the right decision, or if they had opened a door they could never close. Commander Leah Evans paced the floor, her eyes darting from one technician to another. Every beep, every flicker on the monitors was scrutinized. She could feel the weight of the silence pressing down on her. The uncertainty was unbearable. Then finally, after what seemed like an eternity, a new signal appeared on their screens. It was faint at first, almost imperceptible, but there it was. The humans weren't alone anymore. The aliens had responded. Leah's heart skipped a beat. It was happening. The galaxy was no longer a quiet, empty place. Humanity had taken its first step into the unknown, and the consequences of that step were yet to be seen. Her fingers trembled as she read the message that had just appeared on the screen. "We know you are there, humans, but you are not ready. We will show you what happens when you provoke the Ymnar." The Ymnar were coming, and they were bringing more with them. The crew of the Earth vessel sat in silence as the message from the Ymnar echoed through the command center. The words were simple but chilling. "We know you are there, humans, but you are not ready. We will show you what happens when you provoke the Ymnar." The room was filled with the hum of monitors, but it was a different kind of hum now, a kind of anxious waiting, a feeling that something terrible was about to unfold. Commander Leah Evans stood motionless, her hands gripping the back of her chair. She couldn't tear her eyes away from the screen. The words of the Ymnar haunted her, their cold, ruthless message seeping into the very air around her. They were coming, and Earth, with all its technology and strength, was not prepared for what was about to hit them. "Leah," Captain Martin spoke, his voice barely a whisper. He was standing by the window, gazing out at the distant stars, as if searching for any sign of hope. "What do we do now?" Leah took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She knew this moment was coming, but nothing had truly prepared her for the weight of it. They had reached out to the stars, to the unknown, and now it was time to face the consequences. "We prepare," she said firmly, turning to face her crew. "We've been given a chance to survive, but we need to be ready for whatever comes. The Ymnar won't play by the rules, and we can't afford to underestimate them." The room filled with the sound of the crew moving into action. Systems were checked, weapons were armed, and defenses were enhanced. It was all happening so fast, the realization settling in that Earth was no longer alone in the universe, and the first encounter wasn't going to be peaceful. There was no turning back now. Leah stared at the map of the galaxy on the screen in front of her. The Ymnar fleet was coming from a distant star system, still hours away, but growing closer with every passing moment. The reality of it hit her like a punch to the stomach. They couldn't stop the Ymnar. They didn't have the power or the resources, but they could delay them, buy time, and maybe, just maybe, find a way to push them back. Thousands of light years away, aboard the Ymnar warship, the atmosphere was different. The cold, calculating demeanor of the Ymnar leadership contrasted with the rising tension among their officers. Commander Rakash stood at the center of the war room, her eyes scanning the holographic display of Earth. The message they had sent had worked. Humanity was on high alert, and the fleet was moving in. "Prepare the fleet for engagement," she commanded, her voice smooth, as if the weight of the upcoming battle didn't even faze her. "I want them ready to strike as soon as we arrive." Her officers nodded, and the room became a flurry of activity. The Yulinar had always prided themselves on their ability to crush any resistance. It was part of their empire-building strategy, to make an example of any species that dared to challenge their authority. And now, the humans were showing signs of resistance. Arkash had studied the humans for years. Their history was filled with conflict, war, and survival, but she never truly understood them. They were unlike any species she had ever encountered. Weak, yes, but there was a strange kind of strength in that weakness. They fought back against impossible odds, and they did not give up easily. It was this persistence that intrigued her. But now, there was no more curiosity. There was only the hunt. The Yulinar had waited long enough. And now, they would teach the humans what happens when they reach too far. Back on Earth, the countdown had begun. The Earth vessel was racing against time, trying to prepare itself for the impending battle. Leah stood in the command center, staring at the incoming data from all fronts. The Yulinar fleet was still far out, but it wasn't the distance that troubled her. It was the unknown. They had no way of knowing the full extent of the Yulinar's power. All they could do was guess, and that was terrifying. "How much time do we have?" Leah asked, her voice steady despite the rising panic within her. "About 6 hours, Commander," replied Lieutenant Daniels, his eyes glued to the tactical display. "But at their current speed, they'll be in range much sooner." The silence that followed was thick with tension. There was no getting around it. They had to fight, but they weren't ready. The Yulinar had technology far superior to anything Earth possessed, and yet Leah felt something stirring deep within her, a fierce determination to protect her planet, her people. Humanity had always found a way to survive. She would not let that change now. "We won't run," Leah said, her voice unwavering. "We'll stand our ground and make them regret underestimating us. We have no choice." The Yulinar fleet was growing closer with every passing second, and the Earth vessel was now on full alert. Leah's crew had done everything they could to prepare, but there was no denying the odds. Humanity was facing an enemy that had destroyed countless civilizations without even breaking a sweat. The coming battle would test every ounce of strength they had. And even then, survival wasn't guaranteed. Leah sat back in her chair, her mind racing. There was no telling what the Yulinar had in store, but she would make sure they knew one thing: humans don't go down without a fight. Suddenly, the ship jolted as a new transmission came through. It was a message, not from the Yulinar, but from another ship, another fleet. It was a faint signal, but it was enough to give Leah hope. "Commander, you need to see this," Daniels called out. Leah rushed over to the console, and as she read the message, her heart skipped a beat. It wasn't a fleet of aliens arriving to help them, but something much more surprising: a fleet of humans. From colonies, from space stations, from ships that had been hidden away for years. They were coming to Earth's aid, and they were coming fast. The humans would not stand alone. The battle was about to get much bigger than anyone had anticipated. And the Yulinar, who had thought humanity to be an easy target, would soon realize they were facing something they had never encountered before: a united, determined force. And when the storm finally broke, it would be the Yulinar who learned the true meaning of fear. The silence was broken by the roar of engines as the Yulinar fleet finally entered the solar system, their dark warships looming ominously against the vastness of space. Leah's hands tightened on the controls, her knuckles white with tension. Her ship, the Resolute, was flanked by a handful of other Earth vessels, their crews brimming with a mixture of determination and fear. But they weren't just preparing for a fight. They were preparing for survival. Leah stood at the helm, her eyes scanning the tactical display, watching as the Yulinar ships grew closer. The Yulinar were fast, their technology advanced in ways the humans had never even dreamed of. Yet, Leah couldn't help but feel a surge of defiance. The Yulinar had underestimated them, and that mistake would cost them dearly. "Commander, Their lead ship is locking onto us. Lieutenant Daniels called out from his station, his voice strained with urgency. Get us into position. We can't let them isolate us. Leah commanded, her mind working in overdrive. The Ynar's fleet was formidable, but Earth had something the Ynar didn't: the element of surprise. The humans had trained for this moment, fighting against impossible odds, learning the weaknesses of their enemies. This would be their greatest test, but Leah was confident they could hold their ground. Outside, the stars seemed to stretch into infinity, but Leah's focus was laser-sharp. She watched the Ynar ships as they maneuvered, their weapons charged and ready. But before they could unleash their deadly barrage, Leah barked an order. Initiate evasive maneuvers. Now. The Resolute veered sharply to the left, its engines firing in full force as it darted out of the Ynar's line of fire. Behind them, the other Earth ships followed suit, their movements coordinated and precise. The battle had begun. On the Ynar flagship, Commander Akash observed the humans' movements with an almost clinical detachment. The humans were predictable, she thought. They were trying to avoid their fire, using their ship's agility to make it harder for them to be hit. It was a common tactic, one the Ynar had seen countless times before, and it wouldn't save them. Open fire, she ordered coolly, her voice carrying the weight of 1,000 battles fought and won. Crush them before they even know what hit them. The Ynar ships launched a barrage of energy blasts, their weapons glowing with deadly intensity. Leah watched in horror as the first shots hit their fleet, sending shockwaves through the ships. One Earth vessel was hit, its shields collapsing under the assault, but the ship didn't falter. Instead, it fired back with everything it had, sending a stream of energy blasts toward the Ynar. Keep them off us, Leah shouted, her heart pounding in her chest. The sound of explosions echoed in the background as the Resolute danced between incoming blasts, her crew working in unison to keep their ship intact. But the Ynar were relentless. Every shot they fired seemed to have the power to destroy entire fleets. It was a constant battle to dodge, weave, and fight back with everything they had. Leah's mind raced. They were outgunned, outmatched in nearly every way. But humanity had something the Ynar didn't: the will to keep fighting. They had faced destruction before and survived. This time, it wouldn't be different. Back on Earth, the situation was grim. Leah knew that their ships couldn't hold out forever against the Ynar's firepower. They needed reinforcements, and they needed them fast. But time was running out. The Ynar had cornered them, and their attacks were becoming more focused, more coordinated. The Earth fleet was starting to buckle under the strain. Where's the backup? Leah muttered under her breath, her fingers flying over the console. She needed a miracle. And fast. Commander, we've just received another transmission. It's from the colonies, Daniel said, his voice tinged with excitement. Leah's heart skipped a beat. The colonies? It had been years since they'd heard from them. The colonies, scattered across the galaxy, had been silent for far too long. Could they really be coming to Earth's aid? Put it through, Leah ordered, her voice steady but hopeful. The screen flickered before a familiar face appeared. It was Admiral Samuel Carson, leader of the colonial fleet. He didn't waste any time with pleasantries. We're here, Commander Evans. The colonies have answered the call. We've got the firepower you need to turn this fight around. We'll be there in 10 minutes. Leah could hardly believe it. The colonies were really coming. They weren't alone after all. Understood, Admiral, she said, her voice a mixture of relief and determination. We'll hold out for as long as we can. Keep your course steady. Hang in there, Earth, Admiral Carson replied before the transmission cut off. Back in the thick of the battle, Leah's determination grew. As the Ynar closed in, she couldn't help but feel a surge of confidence. The cavalry was coming. Earth wasn't going to fall without a fight, and neither would the colonies. All ships, fall back to the formation, Leah ordered, her voice calm but authoritative. "We're not done yet." The Earth fleet began to regroup, their ships retreating into a defensive formation. They were bruised, battered, but not broken. Leah looked toward the distant stars. The Ynar might have started the fight, but they had no idea what they were about to face. The battle raged on, but something had changed. The Ynar had expected an easy victory. They thought the humans would fold under pressure. What they didn't realize was that humanity's true strength lay not in their technology, but in their refusal to give up. And as the battle reached its breaking point, the Ynar would soon learn that when you push humans to the edge, you unleash something far more dangerous than you ever imagined. A species that will fight until the very end. The tension in the air was palpable. As Leah stared out the viewport, the vastness of space seemed to shrink. The Earth fleet was battered, their shields flickering under the constant barrage of Ynar fire. Every ship in the formation had sustained damage, and yet they pressed on. Each passing second felt like an eternity, but Leah could feel the tide slowly turning. The message from Admiral Carson had sparked a small flame of hope in her chest. The colonies were coming, and Earth's fight was far from over. The Ynar fleet pressed forward relentlessly, their ships gliding through space with an air of superiority. They thought they were on the verge of victory. After all, Earth had only a small fraction of their firepower. Yet there was something the Ynar failed to account for: human resolve. Leah gritted her teeth. The Resolute shuddered as another blast hit its hull, but they were still alive, still fighting. She had made a promise to her crew, to the people back on Earth, that they wouldn't give up without a fight, and they would hold out until the very last second if it meant keeping their home safe. "Commander, we've got a visual on incoming ships," Lieutenant Daniels called out, his voice tinged with anticipation. "It's the colonies. They're here." Leah's breath caught in her throat. The sight of the fleet was like a beacon of hope cutting through the darkness. The colonial ships were sleek, designed for speed and agility, and they moved with the precision of a well-oiled machine. Behind them, the Earth fleet rallied, the first signs of reinforcements providing a new wave of energy to the tired crews. "All ships, prepare for immediate engagement," Leah ordered. "We fight with everything we've got." The Resolute surged forward with renewed vigor, joined by the colonial fleet in a synchronized assault. The Ynar ships, caught off guard by the sudden change in momentum, struggled to maintain their formation. Leah watched as the colony ships opened fire, their advanced weaponry tearing through the Ynar's defensive shields with ease. The first wave of Ynar ships started to break apart, their once imposing hulls cracking and crumbling under the combined firepower. The humans weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting to win. The Ynar fleet's commander, Urkash, was visibly shaken. Her tactical mind, always calculating and precise, had misjudged the situation. She had underestimated the humans. The arrival of the colonial fleet had tipped the scales in a way that was impossible to ignore. The Ynar, despite their superior technology, were now facing a united front, one they had never anticipated. "Commander, we've lost several ships in the first wave," one of her officers reported urgently. "Their weapons, they're more powerful than we anticipated." Urkash slammed her fist against the armrest of her command chair, fury in her eyes. "Regroup. Fall back and reassess," she ordered. "We cannot let these pests gain the upper hand." But it was too late. The humans were relentless. The Earth and colonial fleets worked in perfect harmony, each ship covering the other, their tactics fluid and adaptable. As the Ynar ships continued to retreat, they began to realize that the humans were no longer on the defensive. They were taking control of the fight. "Commander, we have the opportunity to strike their flagship," Lieutenant Daniels said, his voice filled with urgency. "It's right in our sights." Leah's heart raced as she calculated the risks. She knew this could be their only chance to deal a crippling blow to the Ynar fleet. Taking down their flagship would send a message they couldn't ignore, but it would take everything they had. "All ships, focus fire on the Ynar flagship," Leah commanded, her voice resolute. This ends now. The Resolute and the colonial ships directed all their firepower toward the Ylnar flagship, their combined weapons lighting up the void of space. The Ylnar flagship's shields buckled under the assault, and for the first time, it began to retreat, its massive frame no longer invincible. Direct hit on their primary shields. Lieutenant Daniels reported, "We've got them on the run." Leah could hardly believe it. The flagship was faltering. The once unshakable Ylnar had been forced to retreat. It was a moment of triumph, but Leah knew they couldn't let their guard down yet. The Ylnar might be backing off now, but they were cunning, and their resolve was not to be underestimated. Back on Earth, the news of the reinforcements' arrival spread like wildfire. People cheered in the streets, their eyes glued to the news feeds, watching as the humans and the colonies fought side by side against their common enemy. The battle was far from over, but the tide had finally turned in their favor. "Commander, the Ylnar are retreating." Lieutenant Daniels shouted with a grin. "We've won." Leah took a deep breath, her heart still racing. They had won this round, but she knew the war wasn't over. The Ylnar would regroup, and they would come back stronger. But Earth had made its mark. The colonies had arrived when it mattered most. And now, the galaxy would know that when humans fight back, no one, not even the mightiest of empires, could stand in their way. "Not yet," Leah said, her eyes still locked on the tactical display. "We've still got work to do. Let's make sure they know who they're messing with." The battle wasn't over, but the humans had proven something vital. They would never surrender. And the Ylnar, for all their power, had just learned it the hard way. In the aftermath of the battle, space was littered with debris, scattered fragments of both human and Ylnar ships. The darkness of the cosmos felt heavier now, almost suffocating, as if the galaxy itself was holding its breath. The humans had delivered a blow to the Ylnar, one they hadn't expected, but there was no time to rest. Every member of the Earth and colonial fleets knew this was only a temporary victory. The Ylnar, no matter how much damage they had suffered, would not go down easily. Leah stood at the center of the bridge of the Resolute, staring at the tactical display, her mind calculating the next steps. The Ylnar fleet was retreating, but the numbers of their ships were still considerable, and their hunger for revenge was inevitable. The question wasn't if they would return. It was when. "Commander, we've received a transmission from Admiral Carson," Lieutenant Daniels called out, his voice low and serious. Leah's attention snapped to the screen as Carson's face appeared. He looked calm, but there was a clear urgency behind his eyes. "Commander," he began, "the Ylnar fleet is regrouping. They're pulling back to their secondary base on the edge of the Hellas system. We've tracked their coordinates, but they're digging in. This is it. Their last stand. If we don't strike now, they'll come back stronger than ever." Leah's grip tightened on the armrest. This was the moment. The Ylnar might have been retreating, but they were regrouping for one final push, and if they succeeded, Earth could fall. There was no room for second chances now. "Are the colonies ready?" she asked, her voice steady despite the intensity of the situation. "They're assembling their fleet as we speak," Admiral Carson replied. "But it's going to take time. The Ylnar might launch a counterattack before we're in position." Leah nodded. Time was something they didn't have. She turned to her crew, her mind already running through the possibilities. They needed to act fast, decisively, and with everything they had. The fate of Earth rested on this moment. "Prepare the fleet," Leah ordered. "We're going after them. No retreat, no hesitation." The crew sprang into action, every hand on deck. The Resolute surged forward, joined by the colonial ships, and the fleet raced toward the Hellas system, where the Ylnar had set up their last stronghold. As they traveled, Leah reviewed the tactical readouts. The Ylnar base was heavily fortified, and they knew they'd be facing some of the best defenses the Ylnar had to offer. "Commander," Lieutenant Daniels said, his voice filled with uncertainty, "we're about to enter the Hellas system. Their base is heavily guarded. We'll need more than just firepower to break through. Leah glanced at the tactical display, studying the dense ring of lunar ships surrounding their base. "We'll use their arrogance against them," she said with a wry smile. "They think we're just going to rush in headfirst. They've made that mistake before." Leah knew that a direct assault would be suicide. But there was another way. A tactic that humans had perfected over centuries: deception. It was time to take the fight to the Linar on their terms and surprise them with something they'd never expect. As they entered the Hellas system, Leah's eyes locked on the formidable Linar base, a massive structure surrounded by a fleet of battleships. The Linar didn't notice them at first. Their arrogance was their blind spot, and Leah was going to exploit it. "Deploy the decoy fleet," Leah ordered. "Make them think we're coming in with everything we've got." The Resolute released several small, unmanned ships, decoys programmed to emit false readings of energy and weapon signatures. The Linar would detect them, and in their arrogance, they'd believe it was a full-scale assault. The decoy fleet zipped toward the Linar formation, their artificial signatures mimicking the exact readings of Earth and colonial ships. As expected, the Linar reacted immediately. The surrounding lunar fleet moved to intercept the decoys, their defensive guns primed and ready. The humans had managed to lure them into a trap, pulling the majority of their forces away from the actual fleet. "This is it," Leah muttered to herself. "Let's make it count." The Resolute and the colonial ships broke from their position in the shadows, now positioned behind the decoy fleet. It was a perfect pincer maneuver, and they had the element of surprise. The Linar were in disarray, unaware of the real threat closing in on their vulnerable base. Leah's heart pounded in her chest as the fleet surged forward. The Linar ships, still focused on the decoys, hadn't even noticed the real threat until it was too late. The first salvo of weapons from Earth and the colonies cut through the Linar formation, tearing apart their defenses. The Linar base, once thought impenetrable, now found itself under siege from two sides. "Commander, the base shields are weakening," Lieutenant Daniels reported, excitement evident in his voice. "We've got them." Leah's mind raced. She knew they couldn't afford to hesitate. The Linar might still have hidden surprises, but this was their best chance. "Focus fire on the base's core," she commanded. "We finish this now." On the Linar flagship, Commander Urkash could feel the battle slipping from her grasp. Her ships were scattered, her forces divided. The humans had outmaneuvered her in a way she hadn't expected. As the first explosions rocked their base, Urkash's heart sank. This was the moment of truth. If they didn't hold, the Linar would be defeated. But there was no time left for second guesses. The Linar commander made a final decision. "Prepare for the self-destruct sequence," she ordered. "We will take them down with us." The countdown began, and the Linar fleet prepared to go down in flames, determined to drag the humans with them. But it was too late. The Resolute and the colonial fleet had already crippled their core. With a final, resounding explosion, the Linar base erupted, its flames lighting up the void of space. Leah watched as the remnants of the Linar fleet scattered in the wake of the explosion. The humans had won, against impossible odds. But even as the cheers echoed through the comms, she couldn't shake the feeling that this victory had come at a cost. The Linar might have been defeated, but there were always new enemies in the galaxy, and humanity, for all its triumphs, still had much to prove. "Let's return home," Leah said, her voice steady but weary. "But be ready. The galaxy isn't done with us yet." And with that, Earth's fight had only just begun. The battle for the Linar stronghold had ended, but Leah knew that this was not the end of the war. The victorious cheers aboard the Resolute and the colonial fleet had slowly faded into uneasy silence. The galaxy was vast, and the conflict had only just begun. The Linar had been the first to taste the wrath of humanity, but they wouldn't be the last. Leah stood on the bridge of the Resolute, staring out at the wreckage of the Linar base. Pieces of metal floated in the void, scattered and twisted beyond recognition. It was a graveyard now, both for the Ulinar and the hopes of those who had once thought they could rule the galaxy. Yet, as Leah stared into the dark abyss of space, she couldn't help but feel a cold sense of dread creep over her. "We did it," Lieutenant Daniel said, his voice uncertain as he watched the view on the main screen. "We did," Lee replied, her tone flat. "But we've only won one battle, Daniels. The war is far from over." Across the room, Admiral Carson appeared on the holographic screen. He was covered in the fatigue of a battle-hardened leader, but his face betrayed a mix of relief and apprehension. "Commander," Carson said, his voice steady but serious, "the Einar may be defeated, but there are others who are watching. The galaxy is full of powerful enemies, and we've just attracted their attention." Leah nodded grimly. Carson was right. The Einar were just one faction in a vast galaxy of merciless species. As much as Earth had proven its strength, the reality of the universe's harshness was impossible to ignore. The victory they had just won could easily turn into a double-edged sword. "We'll need to fortify Earth," Leah said. "And the colonies. We can't take any chances. There are more out there, species we haven't even heard of yet." Carson's expression darkened. "I agree. But we can't ignore the alliances we forge, either. The colonies are with us, but they're not invincible. If we push too hard, they might reconsider." Leah sighed, her eyes fixed on the endless expanse of space. The weight of the galaxy seemed heavier now, pressing down on her shoulders. "Then we need to make them understand. We're not just fighting for Earth. We're fighting for every human life in the galaxy." The Resolute returned to Earth's orbit, and the fleet began to regroup. The shipyards were already busy, as humanity prepared for whatever came next. Soldiers, scientists, engineers, all were united in the singular cause of preparing for the next battle, the next invasion. Earth's forces had become stronger with every fight, but Leah knew that strength alone wouldn't win the war. It was strategy, unity, and adaptability that would ultimately determine their fate. Back on Earth, the government was in session, debating the future of humanity's role in the galaxy. Leah stood in front of a large council, facing the political leaders of Earth and the colonies. The room was filled with tension, as every leader understood the gravity of what had just transpired. "We've shown them what humanity can do," Leah said, her voice strong and unwavering. "We've shown them that we will not back down. But now we need to turn our attention inward. The Yilnar were just the beginning. We have to be ready for the next conflict. And that means taking the fight to them before they can strike first." One of the council members, a veteran diplomat, shook his head. "Commander, you don't understand. Pushing too hard might incite even more enemies. We've already made a lot of enemies with the Unar. If we go after the others—" "We don't have a choice," Leah interrupted. "If we wait for them to come to us, it will be too late. The galaxy respects power, not diplomacy. We have to take the initiative. If we don't show them that we're ready to defend ourselves, they'll never stop coming." The room fell silent, as everyone in the council understood the truth of her words. There was no turning back now. The galaxy had learned one thing about humanity. When pushed to the edge, humans would fight, and they would win. Leah returned to her quarters, exhausted but resolute. Her mind raced with possibilities. The Ulinar had been a wake-up call, but it was only the first of many. New enemies would rise, enemies that would test everything humanity had learned. Yet, Leah couldn't help but feel a spark of hope. For all the dangers ahead, she knew one thing: humanity was not afraid. As she sat down at her desk, looking at the star charts and communications from Earth's new allies, her mind was already planning the next steps. The universe was full of mysteries, but humanity had never been afraid to face them head-on. The Resolute would be ready. The colonies would be ready. And the galaxy, no matter how dark, no matter how vast, would soon know that humans were not a species to be trifled with. Ready or not, Leah whispered to herself, "Here we come." And with that, humanity's true journey into the stars began.